Hello, everyone. Welcome to another live stream for History Byte podcast. Today I'm joined by PhD candidate Jack Bull, and today we'll be discussing the topic Christianity and academia, the history between those two, and we're going to focus pretty much on from the early, mid, and mid history between the two up to the modern day. So, welcome back to the show, Jack.
Thank you. I hope I fulfil those criteria. I'm not sure I'll quite hit that specification, but I'll
That's
we'll
okay.
touch on as much if we can. Um, yeah, so it's interesting because Jacob and I actually had a show scheduled for next week, and I messaged him the other day about something that I wanted to talk about based on my previous um, experiences over the last couple of weeks as a Christian in academia, particularly as one who's skeptical about some of early Christian origins. And so I'm
Yeah,
going to cover a little bit about my experience, if that's all right, and also then move into
right.
another scholar, William Cureton, who has also been forgotten and faced a bit of tribulation at the time.
Yeah, we're going to expand on William Cureton in the next show.
Okay, so
Yeah,
um, over this last week, I have had a bit of a Twitter storm, as it were, and I use that term relatively speaking based on my audience, which is about 300 followers. And so a Twitter storm, relatively speaking, is therefore like what 10%. And it has come about based on my own videos on the YouTube channel Patristica, where I was commenting a little bit about the Ignatian epistles and the various recensions that we have of them. And following that video, for one reason or another, a few individuals decided to come at me and say, you can't believe the things that you do and be a Christian,
hmm.
particularly talk about the Ignatian epistles, which immediately left me sort of thinking, well, as far as I remember, the Council of Carthage and Florence and Trent didn't say that Ignatius of Antioch was canon. So why have we got an issue, right? Why have we got an issue here? And I delved a little bit deeper, and basically, what they wanted me to say was that because the short recension of the Ignatian epistles didn't suit the early Christian narrative that Catholics want to promulgate, or at least their version of Catholicism wanted to promulgate, I was somehow destroying the faith and was called all sorts of names and told me that the consequences of my actions would catch up to me and that
Almost as like
you
a
know
threat.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it was more of a cosmic threat than an imminent physical threat, but
Hmm.
nonetheless a threat. And in addition to that, then I said, well, look, if you want to discuss the Ignatian epistles, I am happy to do this. And we can have a civilized debate in which you argue for a seven, although I don't know why we're not talking about the 13. Surely they're more helpful to Christians than the seven, or maybe even the 15 or the 17 Ignatian epistles, right? But I sort of let those go, but they wouldn't. And so it got me thinking about how Christianity has influenced early Christian research over the past, particularly 500 years, and how that's changed, although not that much, in the last 30 years. And I thought I'd give your viewers some background and depth about what that looks like as someone who's in it as a practicing Christian, but who also remains skeptical about some of the origins of early Christianity. I think it's best to start then with people like Tertullian and Origen and Hegesippus and some of these early heresiologists and documenters of early Christianity. You see, from day one, we get a glossing and a covering over of things that are considered heresy. And it's amazing to me that even modern day scholars forget this so often, that just because Tertullian or Origen or Hegesippus says something about someone like Apelles or Marcion or Basilides, they're not necessarily telling the truth, right? They might not be giving an accurate depiction of both the beliefs
Hmm.
and the person involved. In fact, I've just done a video on my own channel about Apelles and some of the slander that he receives about being promiscuous. It's like, I don't think there's any evidence of that. In fact, from what we gather, he only ever had two girlfriends, really, or maybe wives, and there's no sign that he was unfaithful or particularly promiscuous. And even if he was, why is that relevant to his theology? But thus, we move on. But the point of this is to say that we begin with, from the earliest age of Christianity, the winners write history. which is true in all senses of history, but particularly in Catholicism and in early Christianity. And it seems to me, and I know Bob Price talks about this, and Marcus Vincent and I have also been theorizing it too, also, is that actually many of the canonical texts we have today also go through a great purification and Catholicizing, maybe at the end of the 2nd century, to try and conform them to the modern practices and way of living of Christians at that point. We then jump forward, let's say 1500 years, and at this point, every scholar, give or take, anyone who's researched the New Testament or has looked at early Christianity, has come at it with a narrative of pure Catholicism. Okay, there's the Orthodox scholars as well, but in the West, everyone's a Catholic, and therefore views it with an internal bias towards the documentation that they're dealing with. If you're looking at Mark, of course, it's written around 70. It's written by Mark. Why wouldn't it be? Same is true of John or Matthew and Luke. Of course, their authors are who they say you are. And so we have no true outside challenges as everyone just accepts and perpetuates the narrative. But you see that already there's pitfalls starting to come. For example, we go back to the Ignatian epistles. In Ignatius' letter to the Smyrnaeans, there is a verse that's quoted by Eusebius as being from that epistle. But Origen
Hmm.
gets it from the Doctrina Petri. So you already see that although there's these later scholars have already got it nicely boxed in, early Christianity already disagrees about the Ignatian epistles and about other things, attributing different quotes to different people at different times.
Yeah.
But because only conservative Christianity has hold of the narrative, they only see what they want to see and perpetuate the narrative they want to. And so thus it's only really with Luther that the West sees a different narrative. And we get someone like John Calvin who comes along, for example, and says about the Ignatian epistles, they're all spurious, all of them. The three, I didn't know about the three probably, but they're all spurious. And he says, nothing is more ridiculous to my mind than the idea that Ignatius wrote these epistles. So again, now a bias has come, a different one from the one that's preceded it, but nonetheless a fundamentally different bias that's also affecting his beliefs to the point where he cannot see the wood for trees. We then jump forward another 300 years, and scholarship changes all over again due to the Enlightenment. Finally, a critical eye is applied to things, but it's met with extreme skepticism on the side of believers, and naturally so, because their aim is to deconstruct all that has gone before. And from that point, scholarship has not moved that far in the last 250 years, I would argue. It's largely dominated by those who are either conservative Christians or, even in the case of secular colleagues, are influenced heavily and accept the working assumptions of the conservative Christians that preceded them. And so, therefore, coming back then to my experience last week in February 2023, we can see why people are worried or frightened of, particularly if they're believers, of change. If they have tied up their life and religion so closely to these texts, when one comes along who says, well, actually, I think they're false, or not false per se, but not necessarily written by who they say they were, you can see where the deconstruction might come. At which point, then, it was laid at my door that I have a cognitive dissonance, that I am in somehow in denial that I am either destroying my faith or leading people away from the faith and things of this sort. And so it's that which I want to rectify a little bit today and point out that actually some of the views I'm articulating about Ignatius and even about the New Testament were not first proposed by me or even by secular scholars, but by Christians. I'm not doing anything, I'm doing nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that is unique. I'd like to say I'm unique, but I don't think I'm clever enough to be so. The first position that I want to clarify and think would be helpful for your listeners is around the Gospel of Marcion, of which I think the predominant uh, attack was coming from. That was predominantly what they were interested in. The Ignatian epistles was the thing that started it, but my assumption or working understanding that the Gospels in the canon are 2nd century is the thing that they were particularly annoyed about and Marcion priority. So let's address those things first. It is my belief at this time on March 1st, 2023, that Marcion's Gospel is the first one that we can clearly and that we can clearly see a dating for. We know it's in the early 140s. We can see that through its reception in other texts and by the words of the man himself. Okay, we don't have the text, but we know through other sources this is when it was published. And this is not really disagreed upon. Now, when we move to the canonical Gospels, my genuine question to those who are Christians, who are seeking to defame me or accuse me of things, is look, I am open to believing that they are 1st century texts, but you have to show me where they exist. I had a debate with Dr. Audlin on this very channel, and we discussed this exactly, and I don't think we made much progress. I said, cite a source that comments upon or quotes from the 4 canonical Gospels before Marcion. And it was very difficult for him to answer that question. And the reason for that, again, was not first noted by me or Marcus Vincent or Matthias Klinghardt or Jason Badoon or any of these other Marcionite scholars. It was noted in the turn of the 20th century, in the early 1900s. And so there's no new phenomena here. Nestle Aland, half of the Nestle Aland duo, used to keep him up at night. Where did the gospel stories go? And so thus, I maintain still that you might say and have a belief in your hearts that the Gospels of the canon are 1st century, but you must have proof for that. Now, here's the important distinction. This is not to say, and this is where I don't believe I have a cognitive dissonance, this is not to say that the Gospel material is not from an apostolic source. On the contrary, I think that Papias holds the key here. Why is that an issue? Well, we don't have Papias, but we are told that Papias has some material from Matthew, Mark, and John. And so thus, it is my belief that he holds stories that and sayings of Jesus that are truly from the apostles. For if they were not, he would not have claimed them to be so. And these, to my mind, were clearly not, and we're told this in a funny term, we're told that they're in an irregular narrative, is the phrase that's used about those Gospels. Well, then my belief would be that an irregular narrative doesn't mean the systematized, lovely narratives that we have today in our canon. Rather, they might be a hodgepodge or a higgledy-piggledy set of either sayings or narratives. My assumption would be there'd be more saying than narrative, but again, without it, I can't make sure that's so. So then, when I come to the gospel, even that of Marcion, my claim is that it's not spurious. It's not the inventions of a man looking to create a new religion or a new version of a religion that exists. It's systematization of things that he has inherited that are genuine, which he places in an order. Now, we already accept as Christians that the Gospels themselves show contradictory points. I give a small example of Jesus' anointing. In Matthew and Mark, the woman anoints his head. In Luke and John, she anoints the feet. Okay, no one's going to lose theological sleep over whether Jesus had his head anointed or his feet anointed, but you get the point. Both can't be true. And so thus, we already accept this, and we accept that sometimes some commentators make I don't know what the word is. They make steps to create the story or fill in what they don't know. And in particular, and we've commented on this channel before, the incarnation stories and the resurrection stories differ greatly. And yet Marcion doesn't include either of those really, which I think is interesting, although he does include the trip to Emmaus and a couple of visits. So if this be the case, and we already accept there are some difficulties, then why is it so much more of a leap or so much more ridiculous to say that all of them were relying on sources and that all of them produced their own gospels and systematized them in a manner conducive to themselves and their audiences. We still do the same today with our own Bibles. There's a version of the Bible called the Message Bible out there, which is the worst paraphrasing of Greek you've ever seen. And it doesn't even have any illusions of what it's trying to do. It literally says Jesus turned up and he had a good time. But no one complains about that, right? But they're systematizing it for young people so that they can access it. I have no problem with this. As long as they're not saying Jesus said, I hate everyone with brown hair. Okay, that's a bit of a step, but you get the point. So these are the Gospels now. Where I understand more of a difficulty for my Christian brethren is with the Pauline epistles. Now, here we have a different state of play. Rather than saying we have source material that's systematized in different ways, what we get are two versions of the Pauline epistles in Marcion and in Paul, canonical Paul, that are sometimes diametrically opposed and present an entirely different position. And my opinion of the Pauline epistles is not the same as the Evangelion, his gospel, versus the canonical gospels. I believe that both of those have the source of apostolic tradition and are systematized differently. With the Pauline epistles, the question is slightly more different. We are faced with two sets of texts that actually are claiming to be the same thing and are different. And here, I remain with the position that we don't know which came first. I think that early signs using linguistic analysis point to the fact that the Marcionite collection uh, shows more sign of not being a redaction than the canonical version. But again, I am not claiming one way or the other for any certainty which way is which. And if Christian brethren have a problem with that, they suggest they go look at the material rather than come and attack me, who is not a Pauline scholar, who is someone who is literally just observing it from a distance as it continues around me. So this is the way that scholarship has worked over the last 2,000 years. And even many of my secular colleagues think I'm wrong. They still think that the Gospels are pre 100. They think that Paul wrote from 50 to 70 or whatever. And they are just as entrenched in their position as Christians. And that's okay. But the point of this and the wider discussion, which I think also can be taken outside to politics and religion and whatever else, is that the discourse must remain around the problem and not around the person. The reality is, you cannot make an assumption about my view of the Ignatian epistles or Marcion's gospel based on the fact that I'm a Christian. It bears no relevance to the situation so long as the arguments hold up. And thus, I don't see a cognitive dissonance in what I'm saying, because I still think that there can be an element, or a large element, I should say, of truth in what's going on, despite the fact that things are written in different form factors for different people.
To that end, you got some images you want to share?
Well, they were actually William Cureton.
Okay,
I thought we were
that's
going
for the
to say,
that's for
but
the next show. Okay. Um, has there been any more Twitter fighting going on since the other day, or no more going on?
so I made it an absolute rule, and I made it really clear to these guys that I actually won't block people.
Okay.
That's one, at least not to DM me anyway. If they were ever abusive to someone else in my Twitter feed, then I would block them only for the other person's sake.
Okay.
But I will never block someone, and so I made it abundantly clear to the individuals involved that, um, and I'm happy to read those words precisely. I said, look, if you continue in the manner that you are, I won't engage you. So the last message I received was, "You're a coward. You can run all you want, but the consequences are going to catch up with you." Again, vague, maybe celestial, hopefully not physical. Um, think very carefully about what you do and the legacy you will have. And I made it
Mhm.
abundantly clear. I said, look, if you're not going to engage with the question, this is it for the conversation.
It
And
reminds me. Oh, go ahead.
I
Excuse
was
me.
just gonna say, I said, if you want to engage, I'll do it all day. I offered to run a Twitter space. I offered to do a YouTube live so that we could have discussion in person. So I made every avenue possible because I'm really interested in the question. You, Jacob, you like me and all of your other viewers, we live for this stuff. We'd
Oh
talk about
yeah,
this stuff all day
absolutely.
if we could. So I had no problem hosting that. But there was the problem is if you're just going to use ad hominem arguments, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with you. I don't. What do you want me to engage with? You're a coward. Okay, I'm the coward. Next.
Yeah, there was this. Every once in a while, I get a comment from somebody saying that if you keep bringing Robert Price on your channel, I'm not watching you anymore. I'm like, okay, bye. I don't care.
Yeah, I mean,
Leave.
I think
Yeah.
the reality is that as I said, I won't block people either until they abuse someone else. Right, that's my rule. You can abuse me all you like because I don't have feelings, but if you if you abuse someone else, they might do, so I care. And again, unless someone is extremely beyond the pale, right, and is just a hideous monster. I mean, I can think of a good example, and I'm sure he won't mind to be mentioned this. I mean, James Valiant and I had a disagreement the other day about
Right.
whether Christianity had ever done a good thing. And
Yeah.
his argument was no, and my argument was yes, and we discussed it, and we were robust, and we had a good time, and then I messaged him afterwards, and we said, "Hey, bro, how you doing? What's going on?" Because
Yeah.
that's sensible reality. We are literally poles apart in every sense of the word on this. But he's such a
Yep.
good man, and we just said, "Yeah, okay, how you doing?" And that was the way you do things, and it should be no different. Again, I make this really clear both to our secular listeners and religious listeners, is that I do truly understand the personal aspect that goes along with this, right? Look, for yourself, Jacob, I know that you have no personal attachment to these texts, and that if all turned out to be pre 100 tomorrow or post 100 tomorrow, in some sense, your personal life wouldn't change.
No, it
But
wouldn't.
for
Yeah.
some of these people, they think it does. And again, I don't want to come across like I'm not attuned to the way they feel.
Now I'll admit I might be a little shocked if it turns out that everything was written before 50.
That
I
would be a
doubt
real change
that,
of
but
pace.
if it's true for some random reason I don't understand, then so be it.
Yeah, right. And so the point then is that um, with all these disagreements, why do we have to attack each other? I also think the other thing
Exactly.
about Christianity is that, I hope I embody this maybe a little, is that I was under the impression that there's an element of humility a little bit about this, and I often come at the question with I don't know. In fact, I bore listeners often with they ask me a question, I say I don't know the answer, rather than just guess. And even if I think I might know the answer, I'd rather not just have a stab because I could be vastly wrong. Um, but they come at this with an attitude of like, well, we know, and you say, well, how do you know? Well, because we know. Actually, I should mention as well that one of the accusations that was laid at my door was not particularly relevant to this channel, but was relevant to a couple of other channels I've been on, and I assume this one was included. It said, "Why do you think the atheists and the Muslims, because I was on an Islamic podcast, why do you think that they love your work?" I said, "Well, I don't know what you're asking me." I said, "No, but why do you think they love your work? Why do you think you always want to have you on their channel?" Um, because they value it, because they think that they like my work,
Oh,
and I
I know where
said,
this is going.
and I said, "Oh, because they seek to deconstruct Christianity, and so do you." I was like, well, I don't seek that. I said, let me mention as well that in the case of, and I mentioned your channel specifically, you've had
Hmm.
Christians on,
Oh
you've
yeah.
had ordained clergy on, you've had people who support things that you disagree with, like the pre 100 dating of the Gospels or the pre 70 dating of Paul. You've
Oh
had
yeah.
people who say those things. Are they just deconstructing Christianity? Are they a big bunch of demons and cowards? No, they're just people who you disagree with, but you give them airtime because that's how this whole debate business works.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we got a super chat from Elias Almodi. Thank you for your super chat. He says, in various places in Eusebius mentions certain apologies or documents and says these are still with many churches intact, but disappear until Middle Ages with almost zero references. How can this be?
Well, I mean, how can it be about almost so many documents, right? I mean, it again, I think this also plays a part in that the controlling of the narrative that I talked about earlier, but also even less so than that. I mean, sometimes I think that we can put things down to controlling a narrative that not necessarily are. Don't get me wrong, I'm not dismissing that as a thing that happens, right? Of course, why would a Peles want to? Why do you want to continue the works of Peles when he's a damn heathen? Who's going to spend the money to get those things transcribed and copied? But however, I would say that there are also documents that were clearly loved and didn't make it for other reasons. And I also think there's stuff out there next week when we talk about the Ignatian epistles, bearing in mind the short recension wasn't found for 1800 years. Oh, sorry, 1700 years after maybe its composition. And as I said before, and again, someone asked me for the reference for this. Like, I don't know it because it was a colleague that told me this. If von Harnack is right and he found Papias, well, then he's out there and we haven't found him after 1700 years. So
Yeah.
I don't necessarily buy the position that how's all this stuff gone missing, because I do think it's completely plausible for two reasons: one, stuff gets destroyed; two, stuff was purposely not transcribed; but three, because we haven't found it yet, and it is coming. There is also so much
Exactly.
work being done. Has a great colleague who's currently cataloguing Syriac manuscripts. His name will come back to me, but
Hmm.
he's still finding stuff all the time. Um, that's being published. Okay, it's not going to break the world because it's not the Nag Hammadi text. But again, think about the Nag Hammadi text. They weren't found all
Yeah.
that long ago. Um, so yeah, I again, there's those three reasons, and I'm sure they're out there.
Elias Almudi, thank you for another super chat. It's also hilarious they care so much about Ignatius and Polycarp, but have no problem with their New Testaments being from critical eclectic committee.
Well, I assume they'd reject the second, but I mean, on the first point, I
Uh,
mean,
eclectic, excuse me.
yeah, I mean, I assume they'd reject that point, but I mean, I, I say they reject that point. Actually, let me just play into that as well. So many sections of the Gospels are accepted by even the most conservative Christians to be later additions. Take the long ending of Mark, take some of John 6, John 1, whatever, right? Pick a lane, any lane. Take the moving of the of in Paul, the moving of the passage about women shouldn't speak in church. That's moved from place to place. So they already accept to some extent that this happens. In the case of Ignatius and Polycarp, oh man. So look, I get that Polycarp's seven letters, sorry, gosh, Ignatius' seven letters, if genuine, written in 110, all suggest a date for the Gospels pre 100. And I get that. That's why they're so keen. And they're so keen to accept Polycarp because, well, he mentions Ignatius and so on and so forth. But the problem is, you cannot, and this is one of the arguments they kept mentioning to me, that the three letters are useless for Christianity. You cannot base your argument about whether something is useless. As I just said, the 17 letters are extremely helpful to Christianity because Mary literally converses with Ignatius and Ignatius responds. That is a very helpful document. But I can't base my opinion of the Ignatian epistle on that. I also reminded them, and maybe this is a subject for your channel, we should do, is that no manuscript has ever attested the middle form of the seven epistles on their own.
I'm already sold. We need to do a show just about that. Oh yeah,
Exactly.
whole show
They are
just about that.
those middle recensioned seven epistles are always paired with at least six others. The only
Yeah.
person who enumerates seven is bloody Eusebius. And Origen knows maybe two. So why is the disparity there? So look, I understand. I'm getting very passionate now, but I can't understand the argument from its usefulness as as, as a point. I just think it's very painful.
Yeah, I want to go back and expand on what I was saying about Bob Price earlier because I think this that this jives with the topic that we're discussing pretty well. Some people just want him not on my channel anymore because they don't agree with his politics. I'm like, and they say he's a bad dude, he's a monster. I'm like, well, show me real evidence, you know? Don't just say this because he disagrees with your politics. I'm not pandering to any side. I don't care which side it is. No pandering is going on this channel. I'm I'm not interested in that nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, I watched two videos with Price. Uh, One immediately after the last controversy on your channel, I think, with James and another gentleman. Um,
Yeah, I took it down,
okay.
last year, but yeah.
And then he was also on Gnostic Informant recently with some others.
Mhm.
And look, as an Englishman looking across the pond at American politics, we're lost, dude. Like we think you're all nuts. Okay, you've all lost it. Um, but I do think that there is an element in American culture that we do have here to some extent, but is less prevalent, where we just think that because we think someone's wrong, they have to be entirely wrong or bad. Um, and in the case of Price, look, I could discuss with him for hours. I think he's wrong on almost everything, but of the political views he's articulated. But
Sure.
doesn't mean he's wrong about scholarship. I mean, doesn't mean he's wrong about the Catholic purging, which may or may not have happened. Um, and so again, unless people literally come out and behave monstrously, and I use that term, quite um, specifically. I mean, I literally mean like as in they are literally saying things that are horrific.
Right.
I really do struggle because we're ultimately. It's funny actually. I've said some bad things in the past, right? I'll make no bones about that, and have only recently come to understand some of the things I've said have been not so good. And it's funny
Right.
because I was looking through one of my social medias to try and purge it of things that I've said that were bad that I no longer agree with, and I came across an interesting one today. Um, it was in 2012. I said that a guy called Rolf Harris was a legend. Now, in
Mhm.
2013, he was convicted as a paedophile. Now, naturally, I posted this a year before the conviction,
Right, you
but I
didn't
have
know.
no doubt that someone would have used that to beat me with as a stick, um, if they could. And so I just think we have to be really careful. And unless people either refuse to apologize openly and publicly, or they just say something so monstrous that even if they do apologize publicly, they just actually have to be put in the corner. I don't understand how that's helpful. And it
Right.
reminds me a little bit again of, and it's ironic that the far left I'm talking about here again, do
Right.
this, is they behave like just like Catholics did in the Spanish Inquisition. That's the irony, I think, is that they're just like those who they sought to destroy.
Yeah. Yeah. I just wish people would just not try to paper over an entire person just because they have different views on a different subject and connect it to all subjects that person delves into. It's just ridiculous to me.
Yeah, and I feel quite grateful. I mean, as people know with the Ignatian epistles, when I first came to this subject, I was convinced of the seven letters in the Middle Recension as well. And when Marcus Vincent was teaching this group and he told me that they were spurious, I was absolutely livid. I mean, I was off the wall furious. And I came away cursing his name and a plague on all your houses. Um, until he said, "Why don't I send you the proofs from my book and you can read it and see?" And I read it and saw and panicked.
Yeah.
So, but I could have written him off in that moment. I really could have done. And I think maybe a me of 2 years ago, as it is in 2 years at the time, so I was 24 at the time. If I was 21, I probably really could have just said no and not pursued any of this, just based on the fact that my heart was
Yeah.
hurting. But that also comes with responsibility. Let me make that really clear. I also get equally as frustrated with those who just come in and say things, who were so blasé and don't respect the fact that someone's very deep life is attached to this. And you might disagree wholeheartedly with Christianity, but if you come in and say things like, "Well, all the Gospels are spurious and Jesus never existed," and what if you want people to open their minds and hearts to you, you can't come at confrontation so negatively. You've
Right.
got to approach it with care, and you have to handle people as they're people. I think so often one of the reasons like why we can get so um, caught up in this aggressive nature or lack of understanding and empathy is because we don't realize we're dealing with individuals rather than groups. Number one, and particularly when people are looking through a screen at you and me, again, I don't think they understand that you and I exist sometimes, and that we have lives outside of the the
Right.
screen we're looking at here, and that when we come away from stuff, we then live our lives as well. And in the case of Christianity, when someone aggressive, secular aggressive comes on and says Christianity's a myth and Jesus didn't exist and I hate you and Christianity's evil, it's
I
like, well,
mean,
what do you?
I have had oh, I don't mean to interrupt. I'll be brief.
Okay,
I mean, I've had conspiracy theorists imply that I don't exist. It's ridiculous.
I mean, that's really far out.
Oh
But
yeah.
but I mean, I had it, and this is one of the things that actually happened in the discussion with James Valiant and I. It was on his Facebook channel, and the reason why I felt like I couldn't continue it in the public domain was because people were just saying things like Christianity's only evil, only capitalism is good, you are a bad person, and you go, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, what are you talking about? Like, you don't know, you haven't got the first Scooby, son. And so, and again, if I was just like, let's say I was a religious fundamentalist, what part of that conversation do you think is going to convince them that they're wrong? Like, which part of that? Is it the bit where you call them a moron? Is it the bit where you say that, I'm so much cleverer than you are? Like that, what sort of
Well,
reasoned discussion is that, right?
you know, I've had, I'm not going to name names, but I've had people contact me. They want me to send them my work on Paul, the work that I'm doing. And it's like, and I knew who they were. I'm like, you're a mythicist. You think that my position is supporting your mythicism. I did not send them my work. I'm like, no, I'm not going to have my work perverted in this way. That's not happening. I may interview mythicists on my channel because that's a different context. But to ask me to go on someone's channel that is interviewing me that is a mythicist, I just don't see the point in that. I'm like, yeah, it's just a waste of my time.
I mean, I understand where you're coming from. I mean, I've appeared on an
Yeah,
Islamic channel and on a mythicist channel as well, and I have no doubt that both of those groups, although again I think they're both absolutely lovely and kind and well intentioned, I have no doubt that both those groups have used my work to dispel the Christian myth, um,
right.
and try and erase it. I don't see that as working, but again, as soon as you publish anything, whether it be written or online, that's the way it goes, right? That's just what happens. And I've seen that happen to the best of scholars who make even the most clear and concise arguments, where their work is taken so far out of context that they're made to look like fools. Um, and that's, yeah, like I say, I mean that's just the risk of being a scholar. But what I noticed though is that there tends to be a very strong theme, and I'm not saying this is an absolute rule, but it is a general rule that those who are like that do not get academic positions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true to say that not all the best scholars have academic positions, of course, and it's also true to say that all those who do have academic positions are not good scholars, right? That's both those things are true. But usually well-tempered, well-mannered, sensible thinkers who can disagree well do get jobs. That's a general
Yeah.
rule of thumb.
Yeah, I just wish people would treat each other better. I guess that's the best way I can put it.
I mean, to
But yeah,
quote Jesus,
we're not. Oh, go ahead.
to quote Jesus, just love thy neighbor, man. Even if you don't want the first bit, you definitely have to take the second bit.
Yeah. But yeah, I've been seeing some mythicists recently go as far as claiming that the New Testament was written hundreds of years after Jesus. And that's a position that I've actually heard of many years ago, like 6, 7 years ago. That's not entirely new to me. I've seen that nonsense before. Church fathers never existed. I'm like, oh, I think somebody said something like Hegesippus and Papias were invented in the 4th century, some crap like that. And I'm like, I don't even I don't even know how to react to that. I don't know. I'm
But
puzzled.
this is exactly what I mentioned though, right? Is that the bias comes so hard the other way that it becomes just as dogmatic and just as irrational, lacking all sensibilities to the facts. Look, if if the church fathers didn't exist, let's take that as a reality, right? And you say, what? How long did you say it was? 700. How long did they go? 700 years ago. What was the number? They said that the New Testament was written.
There are. I'm not even kidding when I tell you. Some people even think this is far fewer, fortunately, but some people even say stupid things like the Bible was written in 1947.
Okay, well, I mean, I can't argue with that one. That's just that. Sometimes it's too much.
Yeah.
But
So
let's just assume the apostolic fathers never existed, right? That means that basically, because unless you include all the way up to like
yeah.
Origin and Tertullian, oh my goodness, like Tertullian and Origin had a lot of work to do, and Irenaeus had a lot of work to do to make up. Or, I mean, that's an unbelievable amount of time to do stuff with. Now, I'm not saying that it's not beyond
It's like
reason.
saying that they made up Marcion, and then Marcion is officially the first heretic. So they made up an enemy. They made up an adversary of the church, so that way they can have a problem with him and attack him. That makes so much sense.
Actually, do you know what? There's a direct analogy here that we can draw. One of the easiest religions that I do a lot of work with, which again I've never spoken on your channel about it, maybe we could, is I do a lot of work with the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons.
Yeah.
And um, one of the interesting things there is we can document their religion so beautifully and easily because of how fresh it is with Joseph Smith in the 1800s. And they are doing all of the things that maybe we can accuse early Catholics of trying to control the narrative and edit the text. And they've edited the Book of Mormon loads of times to try and, again, it's the
Right.
dictated word of, the dictated word is, it's the words of God spoken through Joseph Smith, right? So we're dealing with some pretty high end stuff here, but they've edited it several times to try and make it fit some new narratives. I mean, the fact that, and their doctrine said that things like, which is also infallible, things like God hates black people, they can't have the priesthood, they were cursed because they took Satan's side in heaven. Not great stories here, guys. Not particularly
Yeah, it's
handy in
totally insane.
2023. But we can track their evolution, right? Now, again, if I have no doubt that in like 1,000 years, people might say Joseph Smith didn't exist, right? I genuinely think that might
Yeah,
happen.
somebody might say World War II happened in outer space, and I
But
don't.
if that's the case,
Yeah.
again, the LDS find the same problem, right? Is that they also had, as soon as Joseph Smith died, they had splinter groups straight away because they couldn't
Yeah.
decide who the next prophet was going to be. And again, my argument would go the same: is that if Joseph Smith didn't exist, why did they make up a load of splinter groups and a disaster that happened to their church? Again, Apelles, Marcion,
Hmm.
Basilidus, Valentinus, and even in the case of Irenaeus, why would he make up someone like Marcion when he actually recognizes him not as a heretic per se, but just as a very difficult opponent as a Christian? So it's not even like they rewrote the idea that Irenaeus thought he was just a complete outright scumbag heretic. Not at all. They chose to keep that. He was just a bit confused about Marcion.
Hmm. Well, we've got another super chat. Kathy Brocado, thank you for your super chat. Jack, it's not too late to go to school to be a programmer and pursue your religious education in off hours and have a peaceful life.
Yeah. I mean, so, oh man. I mean, I probably won't be an academic, at least in the short term. Can't get a job in a place. And that, again,
Yeah, that
that's not
sucks.
because I'm a crank and because I'm hard work, but rather because in the UK, they're closing down academic departments. They've even closed an English department in the UK. And if English departments are closing, Kathy, I don't know where I'm supposed to go. I mean, English is like one of the core subjects of the world, and it's gone. Um, I have some anglings of jobs, which I'm trying for, which I don't want to say too much about now, but they won't be in the short term. There are many jobs on the continent, but I'm getting married in April, and I felt pretty dreadful saying to my fiance, "Hey, do you want to have no money and live abroad without any of your friends and not speak the language of those around you? Marry me, it's going to be fantastic." I just thought, that's a bit harsh.
And to that end, I have a link to Jack's Patreon in the description of this video. So if if any of you want to go and support him financially, the link's there.
Yeah. I'd really appreciate that. And whatever happens, even when I get a new job, it looks I'm literally applying for every
Yeah.
job in the world at the moment. But whatever it is, academia won't stop. And Kathy, still don't think I'll get a peaceful life because as soon as you upload anything to YouTube and Twitter, you face those consequences. And my problem is not that I get hassle. In fact, I quite like it. I quite like that I'm lived rent free in someone's head. Um, but I'd also like us to progress as an academic community, as both also on the just on the History Valley group. I want us to progress. I want us to learn. Ultimately, Jacob and I both want to know who wrote the Gospels, who wrote Paul, when they were dated. That's what we want to know. And are
Yeah.
we going to learn quicker by saying you're fat, stupid, and ugly, and you smell? Or are we going to learn quicker by saying, hey, let's share resources. Hey, what do you think about this? Let's discuss stuff. I'm not sure you're right. That's how we learn, surely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it sounds so like obvious. Like it sounds like I'm just saying things that are mother to apple pie, and yet some people they literally can't grasp that theory.
Yeah. Yep. And I think that will be a perfect conclusion to this show. Yeah. So thanks for coming on with me, Jack. And I look forward to our next discussion on William Curriton.
Look forward to it.
And one more thing, Jack's YouTube channel is in the description below. Go subscribe to him, support him. Again, his Patreon link is in the description too. And I'll see everybody later. Thanks again, Jack.
Don't watch the William Curriton one on my channel. That's coming next week on this channel. We better, I promise.
All right.
Bye bye.
Hello, viewers. Thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during a live stream. Thank you.